now I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. So some of you may be wondering, what's a venture capitalist doing talking about ecosystems? Venture capitalists don't tend to be viewed as vegetarians. They tend to be viewed as carnivores in the system. So this was my childhood. Whereas most families sit around the dinner table at night and they talk about the day's events and the family news, my family watched the evening news. We did this almost every single night as I was growing up. And so folks like this gentleman, Walter Cronkite of CBS News, they were almost like extended members of our family. And so I grew up thinking about the big questions. Why is there war? Why is there peace? Why is there wealth? Why is there poverty? Why do some places flourish while others stagnate? And so I went to college and law school thinking, well, I'm going to go into government and policy. I'm going to help answer these questions and make the world a better place. And the thing I learned when I went to college and law school is the conventional wisdom of how you govern economies, how you govern societies, which is you do nothing. In fact, this is the fundamental framework for the Hong Kong government, which is laissez-faire, hands off. Things work best when society does the least. So it was kind of depressing for me in many ways. I just said, well, that's just awful. So I decided, I guess I can't do anything. So I went to go into business. So I practiced law. Then I got into startup companies. I helped mentor startup companies. I helped start them. I helped invest in them. I helped exit some. And I ended up working with thousands of startup companies. And what I discovered is what they taught me about how to govern societies and economies and governments was actually flawed. At the level of the entire ecosystem, when you look at everything, there's something that's been missing. And so when I discovered this message, and when I discovered this way of looking at things, I realized I had to share this with the world. And so that's why I'm here today. That's why a carnivorous venture capitalist is here to share this message with you. So I'm going to start a little bit, perhaps off-center. This is Boston City Hall. And this won a bunch of awards for its architecture. It's about 40 years ago. The modernist school of architecture said, this is brilliant. This is sheer genius, because it shows how monumental a work we can create as human civilization. We are so smart that we can build these great, great works of art. And this did win a bunch of awards. But the trouble was, people hated it. I hated it. I'd been there before. And the reason is because of this. Because individuals, human beings, are irrelevant to the structure itself. Right? This is meant to be bigger than you. And people don't like it. It's just unpleasant. And the same thing is how, not just how we design buildings, but how we design entire cities. So when you look at the island of Manhattan, you can see what happened to East River Drive. When they wanted to figure out how to move people efficiently throughout Manhattan, they decided to build a highway from up the entire eastern coast of Manhattan. So very, very efficient to move people, to move goods, to move resources. But what's the problem with this? Well, you destroy the entire waterfront. It's quite miserable. There's no beaches. There's no places for people to walk. I understand Hong Kong is going through this as well. They've sort of corrected this problem too. So at the human scale, these things that you think really work really well when you're trying to govern an entire economy or entire system, they don't seem that pleasant in practice, because we've lost touch with something. We've lost the human scale. We've lost touch of what actually makes cities worth living. And so if we look at how we evolve the question of design, how we design things, you can see this evolution. It goes from objects, industrial design. How do you design a little widget like this to make it easy to use, or to make it comfortable to use, like a chair or a piece of furniture or a glass? So that's industrial design. Then we look at buildings and architectural design, which is, well, how do you make buildings that are very useful for people as humans interact with the buildings and their environments and each other? And that's why modernist architecture has actually been confronted with this great big challenge of how you actually evolve buildings to make them more usable. And cities have gone through this movement of urban design, how you design cities so they're useful and functional, so that people like them, so people are happy and like to live in cities. So the question now is, well, what do we do about entire economies? And this is what we call ecosystem design. How can you design them from the basic foundations of human beings at the level of how we live our lives to make economies highly productive? In fact, can we reinvent the entire role of you in the new economy? Because so much of what we thought about economics was about you being irrelevant. You were just you were an ant carrying around a little piece of, a piece of leaf to your tribe, not because your choices actually mattered, because you were just a tool in an efficient system. And so why is this? Why do we think this way at all? Well, if you look at a brief history of economics, I'm not going to bore you too much with it, but if you go back to 1776, Adam Smith's work on classical economics said that economic value comes from the cost of the raw inputs, land, labor, and capital. That's what causes economic systems to flourish, the amount of land, labor, and capital you shove into the system. In 1871, the whole field of neoclassical economics was born. They didn't even realize it at the time, but they basically said the supply-demand equilibrium. It's the balance between trading that causes systems to function very well. In fact, the whole way we govern our economies today is based on these models, and Hong Kong's flourishing is based on arbitraging supply and demand. This is a trading center, right? Everything is about arbitrage, taking something from one place and selling it to another. And so people struggled with this because they realized it didn't explain everything. And so the importance of geography came into play. Starting in 1990, people started to talk about cluster theory much more prominently. Michael Porter developed this idea that geographic concentration drives economic wealth. This is the auto industry around Detroit. You can see the premise that the closer you are to something, the greater the relationship, the more economic value. But all of this doesn't seem to jive with the way we see the world today. It certainly doesn't jive with why we're sitting here today talking about social enterprises. In this view of economic systems, social enterprises are actually quite irrelevant. So from 1776 to 1871 to 1990, where are we today in 2013? What model explains the fact that we're all sitting here talking about social enterprises, the fact that we actually care about making a difference? And if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, this was the model of how you governed companies. This is how you created companies. You created assembly lines to make stuff very efficiently. And efficiency and productivity was based on control and precision. You knew exactly which part was going to what product. You knew how much it cost. You knew how much you were selling it for. And this is not just in the past. This is the present. In Foxconn today, they make devices that are probably in your pocket that are made exactly the same way. Precision, control, predictability. And not just for tangible goods. We do this for intangible goods as well. Information technology is based off the same system. You know when your programmers show up, you know how many lines of code they're making, you know what time they leave. And so what we're looking for is a new paradigm. And this is what I call this new paradigm, which is the rainforest. Whereas the traditional models of economics and business have been about plantations, farms. What crop are you growing? How can you maximize the yield of that crop? By controlling the fertilizer, by controlling the irrigation, total precision control. The business of innovation actually comes from rainforests. It's about lack of control. It's about the unpredictable stuff, the chaotic stuff that springs up. On a farm, you know what crop you want. And if you have a weed grow up on a farm, what happens? You kill it. You don't want weeds. But if you think of innovation, what were companies like Facebook 8 years ago? They were weeds. Right? You've all seen the movie, perhaps The Social Network, where Larry Summers, one of the smartest men in the world, is telling Mark Zuckerberg, this is a stupid idea. Just go back to school. And so if you're in the business of being smart and trying to figure out how you control economic systems or how you govern societies, you get it wrong a lot. The unpredictable systems, the unpredictability of innovation is actually important. And so how do we allow for that? How do we allow systems to account for serendipity? So we have this great irony, which is that while plants are harvested most efficiently on farms, weeds sprout best in rainforests. So you have this great paradox. So devices like this iPhone, the manufacturability of this is highly predictable. You don't want people showing up on the assembly line saying, I'm going to make this a little differently today. That would be a very undependable product. But when you design these things from scratch, when you're thinking about how do I create a product that can be really useful for people, you have no idea what the design team is going to come up with, right? They're starting with a set of basic ideas, but they're not sure exactly how they're going to get there. And so these rainforests, these ecosystems nurture serendipitous interactions because they're leading to unpredictable outcomes. So it's the interaction between all the pieces of the system that cause the output. It's not just the role of land, labor, and capital. It's the interaction between government and talent, between education and the industry organizations, between the norms and the culture of a community. And this takes this huge shift in perspective. Whereas traditional economics said land, labor, and capital, and arguably technology, cause output in this black box we call the economy. In the real world, this isn't what really happens. In the real world, those resources, the land is controlled by maybe a landlord, the labor is controlled by an engineer, the capital is controlled by an investor, and the technology may be controlled by a scientist. Something about the way those people interact, the way they do something together, causes that output. It's not some magical black box. If you unpack the box, you have human beings controlling resources, and the way they interact creates the interesting stuff. And real human beings, though, don't always get along. right? We're all sitting here in the room, but we've got all this knowledge, we've got all these talents and resources that we're just barely sharing with each other, every one of you. And so we're separated. We're separated by geography, by culture, by language, by our social networks, and by lack of trust. When you're walking down the street, it's not like you're trying to do business with everybody you're walking down the street next to, because you don't know them, you don't trust them. There's a lot of distance between individuals in the world. And this happens across, this is everywhere. This is across cities, regions, economies, entire nations, across the entire world. Separation is actually far greater than interaction. And so the secret of rainforests, the secret of what causes these ecosystems to thrive then, has to be about the culture that people have that overcomes these social barriers. How do they overcome these barriers to foster connectivity, trust, and collaboration between diverse people? Because the people you know, your family members, you share a lot with them already. It's how you share the stuff with the people that are very different from you that's the most important. And what this means ultimately for you is that you matter. Because you affect those around you. And this is fundamentally at odds with the principles that we've been taught, that I was taught when I was going through studying economics in some elite educational institutions. You matter in the process of innovation because it's ultimately about individuals and the ways they interact with one another. What we found in Silicon Valley is that Silicon Valley is actually just an archetype. It's not some thing in the sky. It's an archetype because there are certain implicit rules of behavior that people use in that culture that cause them to interact with diverse strangers more productively. We call these the rules of the rainforest. They're like an unwritten set of laws, like an unwritten constitution for a community. Rule number 1, break rules and dream. So instead of this rule, you break all the other rules. And this rule says you're not bound by convention. Rule number 2, you open doors and listen. You're looking to not just listen to the people that you already work with, but particularly listen to people that are unlikely and to hear what they have to say. Instead of just trying to talk to them, you're actually absorbing what's going on from their side of the world. Rule number 3, you trust and be trusted. So you give trust first before you get it back in return, which is very different than the way we usually conduct business, right? Which is earn trust first from me before I'll give you anything or before I'll stick my neck out for you. So in Silicon Valley, you find that people just give trust. They'll say, I'll trust you until you violate it. And you think about what that does for the system. It just unlocks the productivity between people. Experiment and integrate together. Try stuff. Do interesting stuff together. Seek fairness, not advantage. So instead of trying to conduct a transaction to win every deal, you seek a fair deal because you know you're going to be in repeat interactions with people for a very, very long time. So venture capitalists don't try to crush down an entrepreneur every chance they get. Because you could, but that doesn't mean you do. You can win a deal and lose the company in the process. Err, fail, and persist. Make mistakes. Try again. It's okay. And rule number 7, pay it forward. Do favors for people because it comes all around in the system again. And this happens throughout Silicon Valley. And you think about what that does is it turns trust into currency. Because instead of like a dollar bill, you pay it to one person, but that doesn't mean you get that same dollar bill back. This way, you pay something to someone else and you get it back into the system. It just loosens everything up. It's like lubricating the system of goodwill. So this is a book I wrote on this, which is about this new economic paradigm and how we govern our societies and how we live our lives in this new system. I said earlier there was one word to unlocking. I fooled you. There's actually 3 words. 3 words that are key to unlocking innovation. So one is fear. The dominant reason we don't practice these principles that we know in our hearts are actually good things to do is because we're afraid. It requires you to stick your neck out, and people don't like to do that. The way you overcome fear is through trust. When you trust people, you're less afraid because you believe you're not going to get stabbed in the back. And trust comes from love. Love is not some fuzzy abstract thing. Love, according to psychologist Steven Pinker, is like a long line of credit you extend to someone with very, very long terms and flexible terms of repayment. Right? You never know when you're going to get paid back, but maybe in 10 years you might. Right? That's love. So rainforests thrive by nurturing what makes us uniquely human. It's back to principles, basic principles of humanity again. It's about the stuff that makes us really happy, because that's why you do this stuff. Otherwise, if it doesn't make you happy, you don't do it. It's about overcoming the pain, right, of frustration, willing to bounce back and do it over and over again. And it's about the relationships you have, the love you have with those around you. Because without that, you can't build really, really risky, innovative things. So it's the power of two people, replicated in an entire system, multiplied millions of times. Two people sitting in a coffee shop can indeed change the world, working on a project together. So when we talk about cities and systems, this was Greenwich Village. They almost destroyed Greenwich Village because they wanted to build a highway through it to connect, to move resources efficiently. And there was a movement in New York that said, well, maybe that's not the right way to run a society. Maybe we actually value the good life. Maybe we want to make good things together, enjoy this rich web of interactions at the individual level. And so silly things like trust and dreams and love, they do power the world. They actually do. They make companies. They make good stuff that's really, really hard to do. So thank you very much, and I look forward to sharing the day with you, and we welcome you to join this rainforest revolution, a new way of looking at the world and a new way of living in it. Thank you.